I'm Erin Gilbert. I am a program administrator for the Neurosciences grad program, and I also worked in the graduate division for many years. So I'm going to be talking about administering training grant payments for predoctoral graduate students, and I currently manage the training grant. We only have predoctoral trainees, so some of this information may not be applicable to you, but hopefully it is. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is once you've been awarded the training grant and you begin to identify your trainees and appoint them. So the first thing you're going to do is go through the trainee selection. Some of you may have grants that appoint trainees from multiple departments or disciplines, and some of you may have a training grant that only appoints students from within your own department. So that process can vary just depending on your proposed training plan. And usually there's somewhat of a selection committee or an application process depending on your training plan. So once you've identified the trainees, all of the trainees, pre-doc and post-doc, are going to be set up or processed through X-Train. To process the appointments in X-Train, your PI can assign a delegated admin to initiate the appointments. And so you are going to first identify the trainees and then determine whether or not they have an ERA login or an ERA account. So to do that, you can look them up in X-Train. You look them up by their first name, last name, date of birth. And then if they don't have an ERA account, then you can request one on their behalf. The trainee will then need to, they'll receive an automated link. It'll go to them, and they will need to register and create an ERA account. There are several steps in creating an ERA account and also processing the appointment. So you have to stay on top of the trainee and keep prompting them to finish these because it can take a while. So once the trainee has established an ERA account, then you will receive a notification of that, and then you will then prompt the trainee to create a personal profile. The personal profile has, I believe, 5 or 6 different tabs, and you want to make sure, again, that the trainee knows that they need to complete all of those tabs. If you try to route the training appointment to them before everything is complete, it won't go through. Some things that are important but not necessarily noted are citizenship, their social security number, and ethnicity. Those should be completed before you can route the appointment form to the trainee. Once their go ahead. Did everyone hear that? Just that the trainee needs to make sure that they indicate their proposed degree when they're setting up their personal profile, or it'll be routed back to you and they'll have to start over. So I haven't encountered that problem because we only have pre-docs and that's automatically done, but thank you. So once their personal profile is complete, you can go in as either the PI or the designated admin and complete the statement of appointment form. And so on the statement of appointment, it's going to have the stipend amount, the information about the trainee, the appointment period, and once that's complete, then you'll route it to the trainee, and then they will again receive an automated email, and then at the bottom of the form, it's good again to give the trainee instructions. At the bottom of the form, there will be a link for them to route the form back to the PI, so they'll select that, send it back to the PI, and then the PI is the one who actually needs to route the form to the agency. So all of this can take several weeks depending on the trainee, and again you just have to send them constant reminders. And then once the form is routed to the agency, then they'll approve it and you'll receive notification of that. Any questions about that? Okay. So while you're working on the actual appointment processing, you can begin to request stipend, tuition, and fee payments for the trainee. So for graduate students, they're different than postdocs in that they're paid through what's called the Student Aid Management System. Payments are actually processed by the graduate division, but the home department or a designated user can request payments on the trainee's behalf. And the payments are requested through, it's called the Financial Support Request Tool. It's a new automated tool. Well, it's about 3 years old to request those. I'll show you what the tool looks like, just so you can see it here. So the home department is the designated department to request payments on the student's behalf. But if you're from a funding department that doesn't have access, you can either ask the home department to receive access to the tool, or the home department can request the payments on your behalf. So for example, this is one of our graduate students. I would go in and request a payment and indicate that they will be on a T32 grant. A couple things to note, and we'll talk about supplementation and compensation later, but you would need to indicate whether or not the student is receiving employment, or basically compensation, in addition to their training grant, and whether or not the appointment is new or a renewal. And then that's going to prompt the system for additional forms that we'll talk about. So in all cases, if you're not the home department in a funding department, you need to make sure that the home department is aware that you're appointing the student, and either, again, ask them for access to the tool so you can request the payments, or the home department can do it on your behalf. There is a list of home department contacts through the graduate website. If you just go to graduate division and graduate department contacts, you can look them up and determine which department to contact for that student. And the home department for this reference is wherever the student's pursuing their degree. Okay, so stipend payments for trainees. You may have already talked about this, but trainees should be appointed for 12 months and no less than 9 months during the initial appointment period. If they're appointed for less than 9 months, you have to receive prior approval from the NIH, and then they should be appointed for a subsequent year for at least a total of 9 months. The stipend level is always set by the NIH. There's a link here to the current levels. The fiscal year for the NIH is 10/1 to 9/30. So, for example, this year the stipend level increased on October 1, 2014. So if your if your award was made prior to that, then your trainees will be appointed at the lower stipend level, and then beginning with the new training or budget period, then they will be appointed at the higher stipend level. So stipend payments for graduate students, because they're paid through what we call the student aid management system, the graduate division requires that the payments have a 7/8 org. 7/8 represents graduate student aid, and a 780030 program. This is to make sure that those payments are allowable on that type of, as a stipend, and then the graduate division will set up the accounts through accounts receivable. So again, all the stipend payments are requested through the online tool, and make sure you contact the student's home department, or as a funding department, request access. Stipend payments are similar to payroll, where they're paid at the end of the payroll period or the first of the month following that payroll period. Right, so any domestic graduate student who's pursuing a PhD would be eligible for a training grant slot. So someone who is already a graduate student researcher and paid by their PI on a federal grant, if they were to be appointed to a training grant, their effort on the research grant would be reduced. But yes, they are eligible. So there are two different types. Salary, if they're paid on the research grant, it's considered compensation or salary, and they are paid through payroll, and on the training grant, it's considered a stipend or merit-based, and then they're paid through the student aid management system. But yes, they can get both, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, that's okay. Questions? Okay. So tuition and fee payments. As they probably talked about, the tuition and fee allocation for the training grant is typically 60% of the actual tuition and fees. So it's not enough to cover the full tuition and fees for graduate students. There is a tuition and fee chart on the Office of Graduate Studies website that they publish each year, or sorry, the Grad Division website. And you can reference the site for the actual cost of tuition and fees. As an example, our training grant, I believe, receives about $9,800 for tuition and fees. And so the difference is $5,000, $6,000. That difference has to be paid from a non-federal fund source. You can't charge the balance of tuition and fees to a federal fund. So where did we get here? All right. So the funding department or training grant department will usually contact the student's home department to identify a non-federal fund source to pay the balance of tuition and fees on the student's behalf. Otherwise, they won't be registered, so those have to be paid. Again, the tuition and fees have to be, the index has to be set up with the 7A Oregon program for the graduate division to process the payments. And the tuition and fee budget is separate from the health insurance, which is allocated under trainee-related expenses. And so the health insurance for graduate students is a mandatory expense. It should be paid for the trainee unless they have a health insurance waiver. And the and again, payments are requested through the online tool. Okay, so stipend, supplementation, and compensation. So the training grant stipend level is usually around, I believe right now it's about $22,000. Many graduate departments have a stipend level that's higher than that. And so a trainee is eligible to receive supplementation, which would be in the form of a stipend, or compensation, which would be salary and paid through payroll. If it's compensation, it should be from if it's paid by a federal fund source. In this packet that you received, there are guidelines regarding stipend supplementation and compensation. The compensation, as noted, should be paid from a research grant it should not be paid from a grant that supports the same research that's part of the fellow's training experience. So if you're paying a grad student as a trainee on a training grant, and they're also receiving compensation from a federal grant to bring them up to their department's level, the compensation can't be for the same research or training. They need to be separate. You can compensate a student from a non-federal grant, again, or as a stipend. If you provide compensation to a student, then there is a compensation form available through the Grad Division's website that needs to be submitted with their stipend and tuition and fee payment requests. If you provide compensation to the student, it's paid through the payroll system. It's considered salary. And the title code would be title code 3266. That's the title code that is used for graduate students on a federal grant without tuition and fee remission. All trainees who are appointed on a grant are required to sign a UCSD patent acknowledgement form. The form is also submitted to the graduate division via the online tool. So they are the office of record for that form for trainees. Any questions? I believe it's up to the PI. The wording, the language is from the NIH, and it's not very specific. The trainee has to, or the PI has to sign the compensation form, so they're the ones to verify that the research or the project is different than the one that they're receiving support from the training grant. So, Any questions?